Thank you everyone for joining us for this webinar about mixing tips from clubs to stadiums, presented by Vincent Casamatta and Rigby. My name is Laura Lawrence and I'm the Global Marketing Director at Harman. Just a few things before we get started. Everyone on the call is muted to keep down noise levels during the webinar. However, there is a chat function where you can submit your questions and we'll consolidate those and answer them all at the end. This webinar is also being recorded and the link will be made available a few days after the presentation. We do have a number of other presentations taking place over the next few months for audio, lighting, video, and control, and we'd like to encourage you to take a look at the different webinars in our Learning Sessions workshop series. You can find that on pro.harman.com, as well as by visiting Harman Professional University to see our many on-demand and certification courses that are available to you for free. And now I'd like to introduce you to Vincent Casamatta and Rigby, the presenters for today's webinar. Vincent has spent the past 18 years mixing front of house for artists including Maroon, Halsey and Queens. He got his start mixing at small clubs in Chicago, Illinois, where he owned and operated a recording studio in the early 2000s before moving to Los Angeles a decade ago. Jay has spent the past 15 years mixing in a variety of settings. After getting his start with a small sound company, he went on to become head of audio at Terminal 5 in New York before mixing front of house for major acts like Queens of the Stone Age, My Chemical Romance, and the 1975. And now I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Vincent.
Hey, Laura, thanks, and thanks for having us. We talked a lot about how we wanted to start this discussion off, but just for anybody who doesn't know either of us, I thought I'd give a little bit of background. And I think, you know, starting off in studios in the very early 2000s was a challenging time for me because really how I got into live sound was needing to meet bands to bring into the studio. So I feel like bridging both of those worlds together has been how I've kind of taken, you know, my career forward, or at least attempted to. And at the time when I started off, the biggest problem was kind of getting knowledge and information and sharing those two things across our entire community. And obviously, these are very weird times for a lot of reasons, but it's great to see manufacturers like JBL and a lot of others step up and try to create spaces for all of that knowledge to be shared, and hopefully for people to come out of this a lot better prepared. And, you know, without getting into too much of that background, I also wanted to kind of start by asking Jay, just to give some context as well, you know, what it was that attracted him to this business in the first place, and kind of what keeps him coming back year after year.
Yeah, thanks, Vince. A little background about me. You know, I started out like most people, you know, in high school. I was in a band, started buying some audio equipment, and then went to school out in Long Island College and started working for a bigger regional company, and started working at a venue in New York City as well. And kind of, I guess the kind of background with me is that not only mixing front of house out on tour, but I also do a lot of system teching stuff and working for audio companies as a tech as well. So kind of where Vince is bringing that background of having worked in the recording studio and mixing, I kind of come in the other way of working as a systems engineer and also mixing. So hopefully between the two of us, we can yin and yang each other into a interesting conversation here. And Vince, I just want to point out you have such a beautiful backdrop over there. I've been looking for that on my Zoom calls with my friends, and I can't find that one. So if you could hook me up with your designer, that'd be great.
I mean, listen, I'll let you know, but not everybody gets to have an SSL and some JBL monitors in their living room. So, you know, I do what I can.
Yeah, we could trade back and forth.
Yeah. Cool. Well, let me just take some look at these notes here and see how we wanted to start this off. But ultimately, I mean, the question that we asked here is, can you take a mix that you create in a control room or in a rehearsal space and just walk into a venue, unmute that mix, and go? I think a big thing about live sound is being instantly prepared in the moment, and everything you do should be kind of like orientating you in that direction. And I think both of us kind of agree, just from past experience, that you really can and should be able to just have a mix translate from studio monitors into all different kinds of venues. So we're going to try to address that today as much as we can. I guess, you know, Jay, a good question for you would be like, how long have you been designing shows with that in mind, and what are some of the first things you think about when maybe setting up a show file, or when you go into rehearsal with a band for the first time? What are you planning on doing to get yourself ready to bring it into a venue?
Yeah, I find that no matter what you're doing, whether it's going into rehearsals or building a show file to go out and do an arena run, or going into rehearsals to build a show file to go mix a band at your local club, in town, or whatever you're doing, you kind of I kind of take the same approach every single time, laying the console out kind of the same way, bus structure, a lot of groups, and then kind of really relying on a lot of the metering on the console based on previous shows that I've done, kind of knowing where things hit. And then what you're saying is that, really relying on that pair of either studio monitors, or in my case, a lot of times if I'm gearing up to do an arena run where we're carrying PA, I will try to build my show file on a pair of whatever manufacturer's speakers that we're going to be taking on tour with, just a smaller scale. But instead of a pair of studio monitors, taking something that's actually got like a metal driver in it, and that's something that I feel like has really helped me have it translate the best over to a PA. But I'm interested for you that you normally build yours on a pair of actual studio monitors. Is that right?
Yeah, totally. I have this slide up, but I was going to segue into this, but let's segue into that first. And one of the things that we know about studio monitors and studio environments, just like the live sound environments, is that the rooms acoustically are always imperfect, to say the least. And I'm going to flip over to a slide here if I can figure out how computers work. Stand by. So move this out of the way. So a good friend of mine, Adam Robinson, years ago, when I was working at my, at the time, favorite studio in Chicago, Engine Studios, they had a beautiful live room and an SSL 4000 and some very expensive soffit-mounted speakers. And we took a curve at mix, and this is what we saw. And what you kind of see here in plain sight is just how messed up mix position can be in a studio setting. So why would I use studio monitors, and what does this all mean? I mean, you can see the low mids, you have phase coherence, which is causing a lot of these huge gaps, and then the harmonics of that going through. But also in the high mids too, you're probably getting some room reflections or some buildups that are not going to give you a true picture of what you're doing. And I think one of the best tips I can give for someone mixing on studio monitors or any kind of small near field speaker is vary the volume, and especially make sure that things hit hard at very low volumes. I know we've talked a lot about this, but the more you excite the space you're in, the more these problems are just going to grow, and you'll be making decisions that aren't going to be positively affecting your mix, and it's going to be giving you. So the first thing you want to do is set yourself up for success. And I think monitoring at an almost extremely low volume at times can be a huge and helpful tip to do that. I don't know if you found that pretty similar, but we all know what rehearsal room, they're usually converted closets or electrical rooms, or I don't know. I mean, they're never good. So it's something to keep in mind.
I mean, I remember just when you and I were doing prints, the room that you ended up getting set up in was at Paisley Park was literally the electrical closet with all the power tie-ins, with that weird dungeon entrance to the snake pit in the basement. And I remember you in there trying to make mixed decisions or listen to things, and it was just like the absolute worst possible sounding room ever, with the most critically listening musician probably in the world. So what was that like?
I mean, it just kind of highlights the fact that you're never given a full set of tools or a great situation in which to do your job. So having taken the time to set up a session correctly, which is something we can kind of segue into, or just like little things like mixing quietly and just knowing that your space isn't ideal and keeping a level head about you is always good in those situations.
When you said you were talking about turning the volume really low and making sure you could hear certain things, what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I mean, at an extreme low volume, or if you listen to any, I know my mixes in particular, generally, whether they're whatever the genre of music is, it's vocal, kick, and snare. In fact, if you could kind of look at my mix through a VU meter, one of the things I always like to see, and I know I'm on the right track, let's say, is kick and snare hitting maybe +3 and the vocal kind of hitting right at 0. with the, obviously the transients of the kick and snare pushing it above.
Mm-hmm.
And if I see those three most essential elements of my mix 99% of the time happening on meters and in a studio setting, when I turn the volume down, I'm going to experience that. And when the volume is up, and regardless of the room acoustics, regardless of any other factor, that will remain true. And you can hang a lot of your mix on that, and you can get yourself out of a jam. And I know we're kind of jumping around a bit on that, but I did want to ask you, that kind of brought to mind a conversation we had the other night about, actually, before I do that, let me move over to a slide I wanted to show regarding that, because the first Digico slide that I had up was a good example of that. Let me move this request aside. So when you're building a session, if you set yourself up, everything I do goes to a group, and that group then goes to a master. And these aren't even all the groups in the session, but this is, I think, most of the master section of my current iteration of the Maroon 5 set that I have. And what you'll see is that kick and snare are, all of those inputs are hitting those individual groups, and then they're hitting two drum buses. You can see one here. There's also a crush bus that I blend in, but that's not really in the scope of this conversation. And I think that with, all the basses, guitars, and keys then hit an instrument bus. And then we have some vocal buses going on forward. But, the reason why it's always good to do this and get in the habit of doing this is so when you're building something on near fields, it's easier to scale up because you can see your metering in one place for every single input. And when you get into, you'll know if things gain structure wise are accurate here, that you can trust that when you get into a venue, even if things feel off, you don't have to panic or derail your workflow, because you know that at its core you have a starting point. I don't know, how do you do anything similar, or how do you handle? Is there anything you do in the session that kind of sets you up in the studio or the control room that's going to help you out live?
I do very much like you, same thing. Everything hits a group. One, because I like doing group compression to kind of keep everything in line. And also for broadcast stuff at festivals, having everything stemmed out in like 6 stereo stems, maybe like a dry lead vocal and stuff like that, sending that to a broadcast truck instead of sending just your straight left right or a whole entire split. My knight in shining armor, my front of house tech and life tech Dan Bloom, who's been with me for the past 5 or 6 years, who I think is on here. When we get into situations like that, he'll go into the broadcast truck and hang out there, mix. But just another reason for setting it up all in groups. But also going back to the starting, especially if you're with an artist that you don't really know or you haven't worked with before. Like for me, when I started with My Chemical Romance, I had everyone set up in groups. Drum group, bass group, both guitar players were in their own group, and I kind of stole this idea from a buddy of mine, Sully, and he saying that by having your groups laid out, just by glancing at it, you could see exactly who's playing and the levels of what's going on. So if you don't really know who's playing what, in your rehearsal days, and this goes even for, not even going on tour, you have one rehearsal day before doing an act in your church or going to do a gig in your, a club or wherever you're going to do it. It doesn't have to be for setting up for a long tour, but you can just visually see right away who's playing what, and it kind of really helps you learn who's doing what. So yeah, kind of same approach that you have here.
Okay, cool. That's yeah. I mean, it's interesting to know what things we do similar. I know there's a few things that we definitely do different, and I had some notes here I'm just looking over based on that. One of the things I was also going to say is if you are going to be building a mix on near fields, what you're going to want to do is just record it, listen to it on your iPhone, listen to it on your laptop speakers, listen to it on headphones. And I mean, the one thing we know true is it's like a good mastered record is going to sound good in any setting, regardless of that. And I think that could be the true same thing for a live mix. And a big part of that for me anyway, and I know I do this more than a lot of engineers, so anyone out there who should take this with a grain of salt, but is a lot of compression. And that's not to say that I compress the life out of things, but there's a lot of staged compression as I go through my mix. And I think it took me a long time to play around and find the right way forward with that, but I think it's worth exploring if you're having issues with things translating, the reason why I think a lot of masters sound good through all settings is because kind of compression is handled in a uniform way. So I try to I like very quick release on most things. And I think, a dynamic mix is great. Everyone talks about how that's very important, but I would say my mixes tend to be a lot less dynamic than most people's because I want them to hit hard, especially at low volumes in venues. And especially when you're in a more echoic setting, like an arena, a lot of problems you have is a lot of buildup of certain frequencies can be exacerbated by a lot of dynamics. And if you have every single element compressed the way you want along the way, it seems to kind of limit that spillover of energy. And that's something that I think is definitely worth considering playing around with as much as possible.
It also helps you with by doing it that way. Sorry to jump in for get over to Europe in certain places where you have really hard dB limits at festivals and stuff, or even at venues. By having your dynamics controlled like that, I find it's a lot easier to stay at a certain level, or especially like an average level, like an LEQ. A lot of times I do like LEQ or 15, like your average over 15 minutes volume, and if you go over that, then they come out and they handcuff you and they drag you away, and then
they take all your money.
Your front of house, you don't know what to do. You're sitting there, your flip flops might be sitting in front of house, and it's a catastrophe. So
it's bad.
So a little bit.
A guy like you has a spare pair of flip flops somewhere.
That's true, yeah, but Dan hides them from me. So, okay, interesting. So talking about this, building a show file, and you're working in a rehearsal space or a studio with a band that you've never worked with before. Are there any examples for you of coming out of a studio and going into a big show right off the bat, and how did that translate for you?
Yeah, 2016. I was working for Halsey kind of on her first album, kind of on her way up, and this was kind of one of the more pop projects I had ever taken on, and I really wanted to. I was excited for it, although that wasn't my background at the time. I was really excited for the challenge and the change. And her first look at any festival was Coachella of 2016, and she was headlining the second stage. So that's kind of like the come up spot where you can kind of prove yourself. You're not in the main stage, you're not a foregone conclusion, and there's a lot of attention being paid to you. It was a very important show in her career at that point. So I wanted to make sure it was right. And in fact, in this case, I kind of did take your advice, and I used the same monitors, same manufacturer monitors that I knew were going to be at that venue, at that stage. Because ultimately, all I had was a few days in a rehearsal studio, and the first time I heard this show in the PA was for a brief overnight sound check, which was just consisted of playback, no band on stage.
Sure.
The first time I heard her through the PA was, the first note of the first verse of the set. So some of the things that I did were kind of like a lot of what I've talked about so far, and I would say that my bus structure looked very similar to the one here. Some of the funny anecdote from that show is, I don't know, we should talk about some festival stuff, but briefly, that was an instance where, because of this bus structure and because of kind of like a mental checklist that I have set up in my head that everyone should, I narrowly avoided embarrassing myself very badly and a disastrous start to her show. We went through a line check, and I just kind of PFL'd all of the sounds from stage into my headphones. They really didn't want me making any noise through the PA because festivals.
Yeah, you really can't there. Yeah.
So I had all the inputs, and about 2 minutes before she went on, I thought to myself, I really should just make sure that everything's hitting the master bus. And I asked the systems engineer at the time just to unmute me so that I could make sure. And I had the drum tech run on stage and just hit the kick drum once, and nothing came through the PA. And what I kind of had realized in that moment was that I had, I think, like a distressor and a SPL transient designer inserted on my kick and snare bus, and I couldn't see them returning to the bus. So I knew that there was an issue with a patch or something, which is why it's always great to have these bus structure pages up and build them when you're starting in the studio. what ended up happening in that case was that for some reason, all of the cards at my front of house rack on the Digico were all patched off by one whole card. So we fixed it, we went on with the show, no one was the wiser. But doing things like this bus structure and having these master bus pages and having everything hit a bus is indispensable for a lot of reasons. Not embarrassing yourself being one of them.
And not embarrassing stuff. Yeah, I mean, I feel like it's hard enough for someone like you and I to not embarrass ourselves on a regular basis. So, you know, we don't need any other help.
Yeah,
I wish there was a way to do a general bus structure in life in general, not even related to audio, that could help me to keep me from embarrassing myself. But I'm still working on that.
Well, that's what's great about this. You know, you can control it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, let me flip over to your. You had a trace, and I think it's a good. We were talking about this the other night. You mentioned something about how you do something very differently with respect to system tuning than I do. And I want to hear you kind of talk about why you do this and why you think it's beneficial. So this is your ideal curve that you sent me. I don't know if you can see that.
Yeah, and that's also the volume that I normally mix at as well, 46.2. That's that sweet spot. Yeah. Well, yeah, you and I were talking about kind of how we go about coming up to a system and tuning, especially at like a festival when you're not carrying a PA.
Mm-hmm.
And I find for myself, as far as tuning the system, you know, we're very lucky in the fact that, you know, it's the same backline. We have backline techs who are usually pretty good. You know, I'm pretty lucky with that case. Same console, so all that stuff the same. And really the only different part of it in this situation would be the PA. And this could even go for if you're touring at a club or really anything. It doesn't have to be a big festival or anything like that. But I find that it's by pulling up this trace and kind of trying to, and I'll do this in Smart, I'll do with what's called an average. So I'll put out 3 microphones, like one kind of near field, one by front of house, one kind of behind front of house. And so I'm not just taking this trace in just one part of the field. It'll be an average of all 3 microphones, and kind of just take after I've done all the time aligning and stuff like that, trying to kind of match this curve. And obviously this is an octave smoothing, so it looks beautiful and smooth and kind of like a baby's bottom and stuff. It doesn't always look like that, but kind of that kind of vibe. And this is a trace I took from a tour I did with a sound system, and I ended up having a lot of fantastic shows on that. And I found that this is what kind of worked for me. So it's just another thing to have in your arsenal to get as close to what you're used to having. You know, trying to eliminate all the variables.
I think one of the things that you mentioned to me was how when you open this up for the first time, so you open up a show you programmed and things feel off, you don't automatically assume that it's your show or your show file. You go to the system first. That's not something that I do, and that's why I'm curious to hear a bit more about. So basically, you know what your ideal curve is, and you know that your show file is kind of tried and true and tested from a studio setting, so you don't automatically just assume there's something wrong with your show file. You go to the system first.
And even like, you know, I remember building the My Chemical Romance show file back in December. Even in the rehearsal space, I had, again, instead of using studio monitors, I had a small ground stack PA, you know, double 18 sub with some like, you know, touring speakers on top. And first thing I did before doing anything was kind of tune that rig to look a little bit like this trace. So I'm now building my show file into this trace, so that by building it in rehearsals into something that a PA that represents that trace, that then if I go back out into the real world and start doing shows, and I tune the PA to this trace, for me it should be right on the money. But as far as what you're saying, I think you're talking about, you know, you show up at a festival or you show up somewhere and you can't listen to the PA, and the show starts, and again, I keep talking to Dan's attested to this, where we look at each other and we're just like, what in the world is occurring right now? Like, what is going on? And at that point, you know, I'll throw headphones on. Does it sound normal in the headphones coming out of the console? Yes. Okay. So then I will go and start attacking the PA on the system controller to try to morph, and sometimes even doing drastic things just taking big chunks out of stuff to try to shape it into, you know, something that kind of looks like this, so it translates. And that's just in my mindset of, you know, I know that everything from the stage to my console, what's coming out of my console is the same as it was the day before and the day before and the day before that. So that's kind of where my mindset was. And that only is carrying control, you know, having backline guys who give us the same stuff every day. And on the inverse of that, if I've been asked to go and mix a band at a festival and I don't have a show file, and I've just kind of dialed stuff up in headphones in the console, at that point, if it sounds, you know, crazy at the beginning, I'm not touching the PA at all because I don't know what the input source is supposed to sound like at that point. So,
well, for the scope of this conversation, this is like what's changing is the venue, and what you know is your curve. And I think it's worth noting here.
And believe in your file that you've built, you know. And again, coming back to the beginning, that your file, if you built this thing and it sounds good in your headphones, that it will translate from a club to a theater to an arena to a stadium. You know, that file will work. It's not that you have to, you know, have a different type of file for different venues. You know, it really should work across all these places.
I mean, I guess there's a bunch of questions to get into, but before I move from this topic, I think it's worth mentioning. I think, you know, a hard part of, you know, coming through this. I mean, man, I opened my studio in like almost 20 years ago back in Chicago, and I worked in clubs for a long time. And it wasn't until the very past few years that maybe I had a systems engineer with me a lot of the time. And you know, it's great to have somebody look over your shoulder at and say, hey, am I crazy here? But it's important to know that like a lot of this is a psychological sport. And I'm not. It's always good to have technical solutions, and we can talk a little bit more technical as this goes on. But it's just important to remember that to trust yourself. And even if there's not that person there, you got to be that person for yourself sometimes. And with respect to that, you know, how did you develop this curve, and what are some tips that you can give to somebody that says like, hey, what's an ideal PA curve that they might want for themselves, and how to kind of on a technical side achieve that?
I think it's going to be a little bit different for everyone. I mean, a lot of people will kind of follow this thing of having that, you know, 15 to 18 dB hump on the low end, and then a slope kind of coming down to your low mids, and then some people like to tune the PA completely flat, going all the way out to the top end to get all that bright, sparkly stuff. I tend to kind of have, like you see here, have it sloped down a little bit.
Is that because your mix is a bit brighter generally?
No, not even. I just I think for me, I mix with a lot of low mid and get a lot of my power out of the low mid, and I've just always kind of been I don't know, bright, shrill, hurdy things kind of have always bothered my ears.
Yes.
So, I mean, again, this is all just completely personal taste, and this is something just over years of me having touring and taking different venues and taking traces of something that I've just found for myself that
so
works.
So what would you say to somebody who isn't 10 years in, let's say they're 2 or 3 years in, they have a cool little control package you're going to take out on the road, they have a rehearsal studio. How did you kind of come to know you had a style and develop your style? Because I think it's worth pointing out, whether it's 1975 or Queens of the Stone Age, you know, or MyChem, you work for these artists and with them at, I think, kind of pivotal and crucial points in their careers, and in a lot of respects they sound very different with very different aesthetics. How can what's the question here? How did you know you were developing a style, and how do you translate that style across different artists so that you can be consistent when you're building new show files?
That's a good question. I think it's just finding something in the beginning that works for you, and whether it's something that you enjoy about your mix, or maybe something that someone compliments on your mix, or maybe something that someone just doesn't not say something bad about your mix at that point, you know.
That's a win. Yeah.
That's a win. That's kind of how I judge my days out front every day with Dan out front. Yeah, so just kind of finding things that work for you and building upon them. You know, I feel like a lot of my mixes are like the rhythm section, drums and bass, I find I get a lot of compliments on that. And it's just something that I started out doing and I liked it, and just taking the things that you like and translate and moving them on to every time you do another show.
I know for myself, I think in this business we tend to all be our own worst critics, and you know, for me, if I listen to anything I've done in the past, I usually can't stand it for more than 5 seconds. But I think it's important, every single show you do, you have to at least record a 2-track of it, and you need to stack those up against each other, show after show after show. What I'll do, especially now, currently with Maroon, because the band is so invested, I have a Dropbox. Every single night I put the show into it for a few different reasons. I do a mix minus for Adam so he can kind of warm up to it the next day before the show. But also, when I put it on a timeline in Pro Tools and I get to flip between tonight's show and the last show and 3 months ago, I'm kind of the mindset that your show, the ones and zeros coming out of the back of your desk, be the exact same every single night. The only thing that changes is the room. And I think if you put them all in one timeline together, even if they're different artists, you can kind of get a sense of what your style is. And I think that's a good tip too, something that has always kind of helped me through the years, because the more confident you are about what it is that you bring to the table, the less shaken you're going to be by the changing environment that you're within. And maybe that's not a super technical piece of advice, but it's an easy thing for anybody to do. And if you're not doing it, you're not getting better. I just don't think you can, anyone, any athlete, anybody in any competitive realm who isn't, you know, critically looking at the work they're doing isn't going to get better. And I think that's a great way to get better. And
that's a great point. And especially starting out, you know, I made so many mistakes starting out that you don't get down on yourself if something doesn't work, or, you know, something like something really bad happens. Just learn from your mistakes and let them make you stronger. I'm sure we both had things that have happened that have just been like, oh my God, what did I just do?
I mean, not me personally, but I'm sure that, you know. Dude, I mean, listen, I once had an entire club of people in Chicago all flipping me off at the exact same time because of I had an altercation with a band on stage back when I was a little bit of a more rebellious monitor engineer at the time.
Was the altercation, did it have anything to do with your mustache currently?
No, this is a quarantine mustache. It's getting real out here.
Okay.
But, yeah.
Do you think that the band wouldn't have gotten into it with you if you had that mustache back then? Because I mean, you look pretty tough right now, I got to say, albeit with your cool, like, Abercrombie & Fitch background you got going over there. But.
Yeah. Listen, I will say that getting in an argument with a lead singer and her yelling at you and you turning off all the monitors is a good way to get in a fight regardless. So.
And what did you take away from that, Vince? What lesson did you learn?
Dude, this is funny. This is not a story that I've told in a million years, but this was maybe the third time I ever mixed a show. And I was terrified for a lot of reasons. I essentially lied my way into mixing live because I was just trying to meet bands to bring into my recording studio. That's what I was the smart kid that opened a recording studio at the very bottom of the record industry at the time. And I just needed to, I wanted to meet more artists. And what I took from that, I was 3 in, and I actually called my my boss. This is at the Double Door, a now defunct venue in Chicago, like 500 cap room. And I called up my production manager the next morning. I said, hey, man, listen, I don't think this is for me. I don't have the right. I don't have it, And he said, well, maybe, but also consider that it was very embarrassing to have 500 people, flip you off, and it was mortifying for a lot of reasons, and I just felt like a failure. And he's like, also consider that maybe that was the worst thing that could ever happen to you. So from this point on, it can only get better. It can never be that bad. And, for better or worse, I took his advice, unfortunately. So here we are,
That's fantastic. and something I wanted to build off of that, actually, because, for people, you and I have been very lucky to move up over the years and get the gigs we've had. And we both started mixing out at clubs and small places. What's something that you took away for maybe someone who's mixing at a small club right now, or at their church, and aspires to one day, get out on the road and tour, wear flip-flops while mixing,
Yeah.
And,
that's the real market success.
What's something that you took away from working at the Double Door that you still use today, or that you learned from that experience?
I mean, essentially everything. It may be the mixer that I am. When you're mixing 5 bands a night, night after night after night, essentially thousands of bands, and you don't get sound checks, and you don't get the benefit of virtual playback, and you learn how to be very quick, you learn how to not be precious, you learn how to care about everything and nothing at the same time. I don't really know, there's so many takeaways, it would be hard to pick one or even 10.
But it is something that even if you're at that level, you're still learning a lot, and every day is important, and even if it feels like you're going through this monotonous, every day is the same, and even if there's not a lot of people watching the show, that you could still learn something every day, and still, when moving on forward, take stuff, lessons from that.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. I think at that point in my life, though, it was every single day. It was like having my mind cracked open and spilled out, and so I think what's so nice about now is that everyone should seek out those experiences if they can, of those kind of in the trench. Everyone has to find, it's like the Beatles going to Hamburg for 7 years and playing 100 shows, every month. And, you need to kind of have that trial by fire while no one is paying attention, so you can afford yourself mistakes. But, what we have now is a lot of this stuff. There's a lot of people like us. But I had every night I had a bar with a few sound guys from other venues there to ask questions to and to annoy. And I read a lot of books from schools that had curriculum regarding this. But like what we have now, if you can combine that with all of the resources like this and all of these companies and modeling software and like taking a class or learn, there's so much more you can complement those kind of soft skills with these hard skills. So, just doing it all. And before I get too off topic here, because we've already been in this for almost 40 minutes, there's a few more quick little things I wanted to run by you we talked about that I thought were really great and really useful. And let me just, okay, yeah. So one thing we talked about was an artist like 1975, great example of, they're going to play big shows, but they're also going to scale down. I think you did the Roxy on Sunset, like in LA. Yeah. So when you're building a show, you're working with an artist and you're putting it together. Are you concerned about the mics you're picking? Are you concerned about does that affect your show file? Like, because ultimately you can go out in a theater run with a band, but you can also work with a band that has to scale through all these different venues. Should it matter, and does it matter to you when you're building a show?
As far as the microphones go, I don't even know what's up there. The monitor guy I work with, Francois, I let him pick. If I don't let him pick, he gets he gets pretty mad. He stops making me sea breezes. It's a complete catastrophe. Yeah. So, I just,
gotcha.
he's
the microphones.
No,
as long as they work, they don't matter.
Yeah, we, microphone-wise, Francois Perez, a monitor engineer that I've been working with for the past 10 years. I just can't seem to get rid of him, or he can't get rid of me. One of the two. Yeah. I feel like we real quick. We did a tour with Francois and I with another two engineers, Ken Pooch, Benjamin, and Tater, and they're kind of, I feel like, in the same kind of front of house monitor married couple thing. And we've actually I've been thinking we should probably do like a couples therapy thing, or maybe like engineer swap. I don't know, like, Pooch could have Francois, I could have Tater, and just kind of, see how that goes.
Mix it up. Yeah.
I don't want, by the way, I'm pitching this to Netflix, so please no one steal my engineer swap idea. And then what would that mean? What would that mean if like Pooch and myself went off and did a gig? I don't know. Sorry, I'm getting off topic, but as I get building the show file, once again, I kind of have that same layout no matter what I'm doing. Even if I'm going to go do a one-off at the Roxy or at some, the Hi-Hat here in Highland Park, I'm still going to lay out that show file exactly the same. And a lot of it's just because, I have, bad memory. So for muscle memory of stuff of just having everything in the same place all the time and just knowing what works. And again, knowing kind of where stuff hits on the console, doing that same thing every time, that consistency, it just helps so much. So, and once again, going back to the beginning, it will translate going all the way through.
Cool. So developing your template and kind of having a very deliberate approach every time. And I mean, these are common sense things, so maybe they're not that revealing, but honestly, they're tried and true, and that's important for a reason. And before we go too further, there's just one other little technical thing I wanted to mention. We talked a little bit about dynamics can exacerbate echoic places. and how to maybe kind of control them, experimenting with attack times and release times. You really do want transients to pop through a lot of the time. It's going to grab people, especially in certain parts of your mix. You know, if you have a Prince style guitar, you want a lot of transient and maybe a really, you know, quick release, and you want it to pop through and grab you and then go away and not suck up a lot of headroom in the mix. Another thing, and I think there's one more slide here I'll flip over to, control and response problems. This is one little note here about reverbs. So, you know, there's a question of, do you use a lot of reverb in an arena? And I tend to not really. I make one mix and I send it everywhere. With effects, with vocals, with the band, near field, they all get the same thing. A lot of people might take issue with that, but my theory is one complete mix everywhere. And if things are added on top of that, fine. I hate making a dry mix in an arena because my effects that I choose are part of the creative sound that I'm imparting on, that I think that, you know, how the band should be represented and what we've talked about. So just turning them off doesn't make sense to me, but you can do some things to help the problem of all these different reflections bouncing around. You're going to get a lot of different timed reflections in a reflective place, obviously. But one thing you can kind of do besides using compression is maybe setting the compressor release, or let's say the pre-delay to a reverb in your song, to the BPM of that song. And most people are playing to a click these days at the very least, if not backing tracks. So if you want to find out your BPM in milliseconds for one beat, easy way to do it, you know, anyone can Google that, divide it by 4 for a quarter note or an eighth, you know, you get the idea. I think especially, I use a lot of sidechain compression on my whole instrument bus sometimes to the kick drum. And I find that it's very helpful to have the release equal maybe the quarter note of the beat of that song. And what the tighter your mix is, the less those room reflections are going to be able to get in there. And, you know, the human brain doesn't need much to latch onto, but the more kind of muddy and confusing releases and time-based things that happen can kind of throw it off center and make the mix very confusing. I'm just of the much,
especially in a really crazy sounding arena. And Vince, I could attest to that. I remember hearing your mix and this effects thing. I came through with a band at the Eagles Ballroom up in Milwaukee, and you had been there, I think, 5 weeks before me. And when I walked in the venue that morning, I still heard your effects swirling around when I walked into the Eagles Ballroom. And I tell you, like, normally when I walk in there, you hear some weird, like, stuff from like a month before, but yours sounded really much better than other times before a month later. So I can attest.
If it was 5 weeks later, I might have still been loading out. So
that's true.
Oh man, I mean, we've been at this for 45 minutes here. I mean, we can keep going, but I think at this point, is there anything else that you really want to add on the technical or the experience side on this topic? I'm looking through my notes here, and I think we covered a lot of it. I don't want to repeat.
There's one last thing I just want to touch on real quick before maybe we open up the questions, or you start doing your belly dancing routine. That
I thought you were doing the stand-up thing.
I have been for the past 46 minutes. What do you, so, you know, you're building your show file, and the great thing is these days, a lot of consoles, you know, whether it's on the lower end or cheaper side, all the way up to the top end consoles, like Attack Scorpion, are able to do multi-track recording and virtual playback. Is that something that is important to you, whether it's in rehearsals or out on, like, you know, you're on tour for you know, tuning a PA or at a festival?
Yeah, I mean, the obvious answer is yes. But the real answer is, okay, fine, yes, but what? And, you know, what we do, there's always budgetary constraints at every level of this business. And someone's like, oh, well, I have to pay to rent this recording aspect of this MADI interface, or whatever it may be. You have to find a way to explain to the powers that be, whoever's holding the checkbook, just how important it is. It's essential. If they want to load in late, if they want to fly and do 2 shows in one day, if they want to push you and your abilities to the limit, it's something that they're going to have to budget for to allow you to do that. And you kind of have to, like, you know, gently phrase it in those terms, or sometimes not gently. But yeah, answer is yes, 100%. I'm guessing same for you as well.
Yeah,
I mean, you figured out how to get playback on an XL4 somehow, so I don't know.
Yeah. What it was, this, again, going back to my good friend Pooch, we did this co-headlining run with 30 Seconds to Mars and Linkin Park.
I remember reading a lot about this. Yeah.
Yeah, and Pooch was out there, and he had his SD7, and he relies so much on virtual playback, which I think is great, and I've really learned a lot, taken a lot from his style in that. Even to the point that sometimes I will forgo even line checking. If I can do a line check or virtual playback, I will do virtual playback. I think that's so important for me for learning what the room's going to do. But yeah, he had a SD7 trying to be super cool. He had the digital thing, and then here I was, 20 something, and I had the Dinosaur XL4 with the rack, and I had to be as cool as Pooch, So
making a lot of friends, taking 8 people to dump your console in front of house for the opening act.
Yeah. But Pooch helped every day, so I really appreciate that. But I figured out a way to get virtual playback into the XL4 as well, so that I just wanted to hang out with the cool kids. So, and I'm still trying to get there. But yeah, on a serious note, the virtual playback thing, not only is it so helpful in tuning your room and hearing what the arena is going to do or the club's going to do. Oh my gosh, 1975, going from an arena one day, we did the Forum in LA, and the next day we went to the Roxy, and the only way I got through that or had anything resembling a show in that was doing virtual playback, and I was in there for an hour just hacking away at the PA in there. And that was the reason why I had a successful show. So, and even just in rehearsals, being able to play back and work on stuff, it's so helpful. So.
Yeah, I mean, dude, I think that's, and the thing is it's easier than it ever was, and that's the important thing as well. Yeah, I mean, there's a reason why. Bands don't like to show up for sound checks a lot of the time. They have other things that are going on. I'm just trying to make sure we didn't forget any of the stuff we talked about, because there was a lot of good stuff, man. But I think we covered most of what I was trying to. Yeah,
we've been going for a while. By the way, I nailed this cup of coffee. Anyone who's wondering, I made a pour. I ran to the kitchen to make a coffee 5 minutes before we started this, and I started to make a pour over, and it came right down to the last second, and it turned out really good. So.
Doesn't the console have a K-cup machine in it or something like that? Can't you?
That's the other brand console, which is in the second living room. It's in seclusion in the West Wing.
Well, since this is the first time, I've never done one of these before. This is the first time we've done this. I don't know if Laura is going to jump back on to ask questions or how questions get fielded here.
I am. I do have some questions
okay, great.
for you guys.
Oh, there are other people out there. It's not just us talking to each other.
So sad. This is what we do every day, except for today I changed my clothes.
Yeah.
So this first question is for Jay. The person is asking, how long did it take you to become comfortable using Smart to confirm or drive your EQ settings?
That's a great question. It took a while of really understanding it, and I think the biggest thing with Smart is learning when not to trust it and when not to just put your blind faith in it, because in the end of the day, that trace or the computer can really tell you anything, and it's not always true. So learning to use it in a way, and there's that red line, not to turn this into a smart class, but that's called coherence and a transfer function. Transfer function being showing what's coming out of the console versus what's the microphone seeing or what's coming out of the PA. And that red line, the coherence. If Vince, you want to pull up that trace again real quick?
Yeah, let me do that.
If it's like a flat line going across, that means you have really solid coherence, so you can trust.
Actually, great example. So solid coherence on yours.
Solid coherence.
Really bad coherence.
Yeah, or not even that bad, but so you can see there where you have those two big dips, you have that coherence drops down, and what that's telling you is that you can't really trust those regions, so don't just go blindly starting to EQ that out. But anyways, to get to your question, it was just a couple years of me using it, and I would definitely suggest taking a class or asking questions and see people using it, and now for me it's one of my most valuable tools that I have to have with me no matter what I'm doing, whether it's even if I'm going into mix a friend's band in a club and I can't bring anything, I will still bring smart with me.
Some kind of RTA always, yeah.
Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, that was great. We have a bunch more. So here's the next one. There are so many great engineers out there. How do I get the opportunities that you guys have had?
Oof. I don't even know how I stumbled into this. So I did everything wrong at every step of the way. So, I mean, you know, it's so funny. I mean, I'm coming up on, you know, I'm 37 years old. I'm somewhere in the middle of a career. And, you know, even in this time, things have changed so much. Yeah. or who knows? It's been fun. You know, for me, it was, you know, being involved in music and being part of a scene. And that just meant, you know, all I really cared about were my friends' bands and bands that were playing at small venues in the cities that I lived in. So that was a path in for me. I don't know if that's even still a valid path anymore. I know a lot of people find high quality audio vendors and get out on the road, get to see how things are done and kind of learn and come up that way. And then, you know, that might be even a better and more direct path. For me, I really like the idea of starting small in clubs because like I said earlier, like no one's paying attention, or at least you're free to just make mistakes. I've seen a lot of engineers like get stuck where they're in a position where maybe too many people are paying attention and they haven't quite earned their stripes yet, because it takes time. It's one of those things that takes time. So, and also, I mean, at the time I had my recording studio, I was working in clubs. I was moonlighting for a klezmer band on the weekend to make ends meet. You know, all of those experiences informed me in some way or another. So it's not even like there's one path. It's just like absolutely don't stop and just take every opportunity you're granted.
And there's one really quick thing I want to add to that, which I think is so important, is that as far as getting the opportunities, every opportunity I've gotten, well, for the most part of it, was me going out with a support band and just being friendly and just not being an asshole. And
that's a great one.
And becoming friends or helping out the headlining act, and then getting offered a job through them. I think it's, no matter, you could be the hottest mixer in the world. You could be pushing out perfect mixes up there, but if you're not a nice dude or friendly, or you're just being an a-hole to people, no one is going to want to work with you. They're going to take any time of day. They're going to take the guy who's willing to work, who's willing to jump in and help out, someone you want to hang out with, because especially when you're on tour, I mean, we live with the rest of the crew 24/7. You sleep 2 feet away from them. So you know, you're going to end up taking that person who's maybe a bit nicer or more willing to help out and work, have a better attitude.
More hardworking. So, exactly.
So having that great attitude and just being a nice guy or girl, like that's so, I can't stress that enough.
Okay, perfect. Next question. Have you had a system or board freeze or major failure? And if so, what did you do?
You want to go first, Jay?
Yes. We were down in South America on 30 Seconds to Mars, myself and Francois. I was using a certain brand digital console that we were picking up locally down there in all these places. And in a course of about 3.5 weeks, I had the console die 5 times on me. Twice was mid-show. One thing that myself and Francois have always done is that he sends me a backup front of house mix from the monitor console to front of house, and that just comes down at 2 analog XLR lines and goes straight into my system's processor. So if anything was to happen to my console, I just hit two unmute buttons and he's mixing, and he mixed the rest of the show there, and my console completely just packed up. The second time when it happened, he took over for about a song, and I was able to restart my console and get it working again. But it's kind of having those. It's like kind of like a fire drill, or like a action plan, like the weather action matrix. Be prepared. Just kind of so you have something as a backup. You know, you don't want to end up having your console pack up and then you're sitting there and everyone's looking at you and you're like, well, the show's over. So
well, you're where the buck stops, and I think that's the thing important to remember. It's like you're the end result of all responsibilities, all decisions, all problems fall on your shoulders. And if you don't take that, like just like you said, having a backup plan and testing that backup plan. Everyone, if you're working in a 2 console system, you should be. I also do the same thing where I make a mix plus click, and I send that to the first output card in my rack, so that in the event that something happens in monitors, they can just patch into the first those kinds of things, and actually making sure that you test them can get you through a show. If it's important to remember that failure is always imminent, and the fancier the gear you use, the more temperamental it's going to be. You can drive a Toyota Camry forever, but a Ferrari it's going to break down. But
what Vince doesn't know is that the lead singer of Maroon 5 has actually been using his mix plus click for the entire album cycle, and that's actually why Vince still has a job.
Yeah. I mean, I've had to use those too. There's actually too many times. I was trying to think of a story while you were telling that, but like, there's too many times to count. There just is. So having a backup plan, it never feels nice. Just to assume that it's going to happen and try it out. You got an extra few hours in sound check. The band walked off stage.
Yeah,
pull the cable out and see what happens.
I had our friend Paul Sorrell on backup in case you didn't make the call today. So if you didn't show up, Paul was standing by at his studio just in case something happens.
If you want to get him on here, I'm good to go. So that's fine.
Yeah.
All right, next question. What are steps you take if you get multi-track for a new band you're going to mix, and the tracks are from a different console and possibly different mics and DIs as well?
It's a good question. I'll take a quick stab at it. I mean, I still think the question is, what should you do, or what was the first part of that?
What are the steps that you would take?
Steps I would take. I mean, you just have to load it in and go with it. Obviously, you're not going to heavily automate that. You're not going to dig in and make very precise cuts on EQ or real creative compression choices. You can still build the archetype or the architect. You be the architect of a show without having that source material in there. I wouldn't want to go from that right into a live show. So I would make sure to communicate to anyone who needs to know that the band should be there for that first sound check at the very least to change your gains. But I wouldn't worry too much about it. Just don't get caught in the weeds. Don't let yourself kind of drill down to those very nuanced decisions in automation.
Yeah, and honestly, anything helps. Like any little bit of stuff you can get. Like if you get a multi-track, that's huge. I've taken over on a few different shows that I can think of in the past couple of years where I got a multi-track and it was different sample rate, different console, different everything. But man, like just getting that stuff is already, you're so much further ahead of the game. Load it in. You could still get your bus structure set up, see how everything's hitting. Even just listening to inputs, yeah, it's a different mic, it's a different console. Is it going to be exactly the same? No, but you're already so much further ahead just by getting to know what's coming where. So that way, when you do get into the rehearsal, you're already that much further ahead than you were before. So that's, it's definitely take that opportunity. And yeah, and like Vince said, just take it with a grain of salt, like our friendship.
I'm out of here.
All right, the next question is playing off of that a little bit, asking how much time do you prefer to have a nice sound check?
The answer is that's not a decision that you will ever get to make. So I don't want to say like not totally irrelevant, but I don't think that get the recording so you can work off of that. If you need something, you need to communicate that to people. You're working within a team, and it's important to remember that team dynamic matters. What you want is up for conversation, and you're not at the top of the list of people asking. So be prepared for the worst, and just communicate what you need. Yeah, I mean, I guess I expect very little, and you have to be prepared to just get good at working fast because you're never going to be given what you need. I don't know if Jay would agree with that, but
agreed.
Okay, next question is asking, how do you guys deal with feedback right in the middle of the music playing?
Want to go for that, Jay?
Feedback, I immediately blame our monitor engineer. Even the trick is to get all blame off of you and blame everyone else. No, I'm kidding. The first, it's happened to all of us. You're at a club, or you're at a place where you're not used to that PA, or your artist walks out and you're looking at something, and an artist walks out and takes a microphone and puts it right in front of the speaker to see what happens, or they're climbing up the tower next to the PA.
That's part of the excitement of the job, though. It's like it's kind of like not the moment to focus on it. You know?
The first thing, because sometimes it'll be happening, and you'll look up and nothing seems out of the ordinary, and at that point, just start soloing things. Same thing if it's feedback, or let's say something's popping, like a mic's breaking up, and you're just trying to find it. Is like stay calm, put your headphones on, and again, this is a great thing with the bus structure. Instead of soloing each input, just solo the drum bus. Is that clean? Yes. The instrument bus. Is that clean? Yes. The vocal. It's a great way to kind of narrow that scope down. So same thing with feedback. After you deliberately blame the monitor engineer to everyone around, look around front of house and be like, oh, our monitor guy, once again, too many sea breezes, unbelievable. Then put your headphones on and find out why you're actually making a feedback.
I'll just add to that briefly because I don't want to spend too much time on it. It's like the one thing, it's super uncomfortable because you feel like all eyes are on you at that moment. Everyone's blaming you for ruining their night. No one I've never heard anyone say, unless it was like truly atrocious, I've never heard anyone really remember that. And it's always like triage. So you have to assume, for the last half a decade, I don't think I've had a lead singer behind the PA once. I don't necessarily this is a really important thing, I guess, if I was going to give advice on this, don't make critical decisions based on eliminating feedback. Make critical decisions based on a good sounding mix, and then address the feedback after that. You should never be so concerned about your downside that you forget about your upside when you're creating a great mix.
Wait, so you're saying you haven't had a lead singer behind a PA in the past 5 years. Yeah. Have you thought about turning the PA? Have you thought about turning the PA around?
I would love to. I would love to be able to.
Just something to think about for your next tour, maybe. Sorry.
Yeah. So no, but that's it. I mean, there's always usually just a few dB of difference between feeding back and not as well. So don't just grab with all 10 fingers a bunch of stuff and pull it towards you. Your first move should be think and then act.
Okay, next question is asking, for engineers just starting off, what would you recommend having with you on your club shows to set you up for success, especially in a club with musicians that are less trained?
It's a great question. Jay, you've had a lot of experience not only working at specific clubs like Terminal 5, and I've had those experiences, but also touring at that level too. Is there anything besides SMART that you just always had with you or that mattered?
Yamaha SPX 990 for the big snare.
Yeah, I'm with.
No, you know what? I think even more important than any piece of gear nowadays, there's so many plugins that are out there and things like that. This might be a boring answer to it, but knowing exactly how to get the most out of your venue. If that's you coming in on a day where there's no one there, ringing out the system, spending time tuning it, walking around, building some presets on your console. I think presets are so important when you're having different bands every day come in. Like, especially if you don't have much time for a sound check, have a kick drum preset. It's at least a ballpark starting point, and just some things on the console that work for you. Maybe you walking around the room and realizing, man, there's so much 63 hertz in this place, and just knowing that in the back of your mind. Turn the PA on, and while the PA is on, like, show volume, go walk on stage and see what it's like on the stage. Maybe you're like, wow.
With the PA on?
With the PA on, yeah. Go and be like, man, on stage there's so much, low mid. There's like it's just rolling around that will let you then, when the band's up there, to know kind of what's happening and where to start cutting. As far as a piece of equipment, I feel like in that situation. Again, this might be a boring answer to it, but it's, I think, more of just knowing the venue and knowing what you can get out of it is probably the most important thing. I don't know if you have a different take on it.
No, that's really cool. I like the idea of walking on the stage. It's something I've never tried, and it makes a lot of sense. I just, I don't think I can really add to that. That's great.
Francois often makes me walk on stage when we have subs and there's a lot of low end on stage, and he's like, "Oh, matey, come on stage. There's so much low end." So I'll go. This is true. I walk up there, but right before I go on the stage, I turn the ground subs down. I turn them down like 12 dB. And then I walk up there and I'm like, "I don't know what you're talking about. It's not bad at all." And he's like, "Oh, matey, it was so much worse before." And I was like, "Okay." And then I go back out front and turn it back up again. But that's another way of walking.
It's just gaslighting your coworkers. So,
yeah.
All right, the next question is asking, what is the better monitoring for musicians? In-ears, floor monitors, or side fills, or a combination?
Go ahead, Vince.
I mean, like I told you guys, my only monitor engineering anecdote, and I got into a fight with the lead singer. So I don't know, man. I mean, I think the short answer for me, what I have seen, there's a bit of a generational gap, in broad strokes. I think all younger musicians have kind of grown up with the desire to have in-ear monitors. So, but I think it's good to have some air moving on the deck. And I don't know if I'm totally qualified to answer this, but I really do think you want to create energy in the space a lot of times. But the first person you should be asking or having a conversation with is your artist in your band, and get inside their heads and like find out what their anxieties are and what their desires are. And some people can't stand it. They really can't stand having a bunch of subs rattling around, and other people, that's all they care about. So it's as an engineer, you gotta, the job of monitors, I feel like, is you're serving the needs of what the artist needs to do their job best, and you're creating space for them to do it.
I totally agree with that. I will say anything you can do to cut the stage volume down, especially in a smaller venue or at your church or at your club. I mean, anything you can do to get that stage volume down is only going to help the front of house engineer out, and that even goes all the way up to doing festivals and arenas. Like, whatever you could do to lower that volume is just going to help you out. And a lot of times in-ear monitors it cleans it up so much because you're not just having a volume war. So
you work for like Queens of the Stone Age, and I come up in a very rock and like punk background, and stages have gotten quieter through time. But like the reality is, I mean, tell me how you feel about this, but I would stop very short of asking a guitar player to like turn his amp down. I think there's a lot of reasons. You can come up with maybe another solution, maybe move the amp, but creating tones. I try to remember I try to stop short of those things. I don't know if when you're working with like Queens of the Stone Age, how loud is that stage? I have to imagine very loud.
It's super loud, but they made the conscious decision, I believe, last album cycle to switch from wedges and side fills to ears. They all decided as a group it wasn't their favorite thing in the world wearing in-ears, but they wanted to be able to improve that quality out front, and also just be able to hear each other sing in the background harmonies and stuff like that. Am I going to walk up to someone in that band and be like, "Dude, you got to turn your amp down"? Probably not. But they were willing to do things like taking their guitar cabs and turning them at an angle, so they're not just pointing straight at front of house, and just little things like that helped so much.
Cool. So little things, big difference. Yeah, I'll agree with that for sure. Yeah.
All right, the next question is asking if you can explain what a mix minus is.
Go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, I guess I used the term a few times. We basically, like, through a matrix or through busing, you're creating a full mix and subtracting, or in some cases adding, one element to it. And they're super useful to set up these structures within your session or on your console. For a variety of reasons. If you're going into broadcast, you might want to deliver them an entire mix and then the vocal separate. It's important. Every desk has an easy and a hard way of achieving that. And so I think that I don't want to give specific advice on the consoles, but try building them and try creating them. Usually one with or without a vocal.
Mainly just. Everything goes to a bus and then not the vocal in most times. And if you're working on a console that doesn't have groups, you can achieve that by just sending everything, even aux send everything to an aux send without the vocal, and then you have
at Unity or something. Yeah.
And then you have everything without the vocal, and it doesn't even necessarily have to go anywhere. You don't have to assign that to go leave the console or anything like that. It's just building that to have in your back pocket in case you need to, like Vince said, deliver that to a broadcaster to someone without the vocal.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. This person's asking, how do you deal with the stress of having to load out if, your Casamigos is all gone, you're missing your flip-flop, and your super flip-flops are on the bus?
Who? I guess, go, Jay, tell us how. Tell us how you do it. How could you possibly survive?
I'll tell you this, being in this quarantine, I've almost forgotten about that stress. So whoever asked that question, thanks so much for bringing it up, because you've made me realize why I really miss touring. It's tough. A lot of times, I'll phone a friend. Sometimes I just won't load out if that's the case. Oftentimes I'll actually make Francois, our monitor engineer, come up and do the loadout for me. Especially if the in-ears are feeding back, but it's tough. It's tough. And that kind of goes to, again, the whole thing of just obviously be proficient at your job, being technically good, but also having, I know who asked that question, and I'm never speaking to them again, but being able to it's someone I've toured with, and being able to have a good time in that kind of relationship makes all the difference on the road, from being stressed out and burning out to enjoying yourself. So hopefully that answers your question.
Thanks for taking that one seriously, Jay.
I take everything seriously. I'm not sure if you do it.
Yeah.
All
cool.
right, thank you guys so much for doing this. This was a really fun webinar, and we appreciate everyone who attended as well. If you're interested in attending any of the future sessions, you can find those on pro.harman.com. And as a reminder, this was recorded, so if you'd like to catch it again later, it will be posted in a few days. So thank you so much, Vincent and Jay. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you guys so much. This was a lot of fun, despite what Vincent told me it would be. So thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.